Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
All right. How you doing? The second service crowd, look at you. You all showed back up this week. Just as a public service announcement, we have two other services. One of them is at a time that even Satan himself wouldn't come to, which is 8 o'clock, but we have to be here. And the other is right after this one at noon. Hey, coming up, we're going to lay out some plans for you. We recognize we have a space issue, but I also recognize that last week for Easter, we tried 4 one-hour services, which as a preacher who could easily preach for 1 hour, it was a total nightmare for me. But it's what we had to do for Easter to make it work, and we'll figure out how to make it work until we solve some of the space issues. But I'm glad you're here. We're launching a brand new series today titled, as you can see, He Gets Us. How many people watched the Super Bowl this year? You don't have to be embarrassed. You can raise your hand. I see those hands. I will occasionally watch American football, but only really when my dad is with me. My dad loves football. He's in this service. I loved soccer. That's what I grew up playing. I played football as well, but like you put on pads and they're sissies. And so I'm like, I need a sport without pads. But this year's Super Bowl, I think people watch the Super Bowl for several reasons. Raise your hand if you watch the Super Bowl because you love football. Okay, raise your hand if you watch the Super Bowl because you want to see the commercials. All right. Raise your hand if you watch the Super Bowl because Taylor Swift was going to be on the screen occasionally. Stop it all. Anyways, I think they should have changed the title for this year's Super Bowl to the Swifty Bowl 2024 or 58 because everything you heard people talking about afterwards was, did you see when Taylor smiled? And what's his face? Kelsey? I don't know. Anyways, I'm just not a Swiftie, but it seems like it was a major attraction this year. The other attraction, though, is the commercials. And there was one commercial in particular, if you're a Christian, if you're an evangelical Christian or a conservative Christian, which have gotten a super bad rap lately, but I want you to know I like you. But if you're one of those, then even if you didn't see the Super Bowl and you didn't see the ad, your Facebook friends let you know about it. Because they were all wrapped around the axle about this particular ad, and it's from the He Gets Us campaign. Now, this campaign's been going for a while. You could do all your own research and discover who the funders of it are and everything, but their general intention seems to be that they want people to understand that Jesus understands you and I. It's the whole idea that He gets us, all of us. And so this year's ad was strange, mostly because you wonder, why did they pay someone when all of the images seem to be AI generated? And they seem to be AI generated because they are. They literally tell you on their website they are. And so it has a little bit of a weird feel to it to begin with, but then to add to that, it has this element of foot washing, which if you didn't grow up in the church, just seems weird. If you did grow up in the church, it just seems weird. Because it's actually a specific moment in which Jesus washes the disciples' feet. And he washes them because because they're dirty, because they actually need to be washed so they can sit at these couches in which their feet were going to be up and they were going to recline to eat a meal together. No one was there to wash the feet. And so Jesus serves them by washing their feet versus like a foot washing service. And if you grew up in church, in particular, if you grew up in the Pentecostal church or charismatic church, foot washing services were pretty routine. It was like, we're going to have communion and then foot washing. But the ad this year, I just want to focus on it for a moment because it had several scenes that sort of appeared, and in each one of them, someone is washing someone's feet. So let's just take a quick look at a few of them here together. There's, of course, the classic white guy, cowboy, washing the Indian's feet. And then there's, of course, this one here with my wife washing someone's feet. No royalties were paid, by the way. In case you don't think it's right, I'll zoom in on it for you just so you can see. Anyways, and then you have the preppy cheerleader girl washing the feet of it's not emo, maybe it's hipster person. And so it's like, I get it. These people are saying, we love you. We see you, we understand you, and they're using foot washing, which outside of the church doesn't make a lot of sense for most people, which causes me to pause and wonder, who's the ad for? Is the ad for the person who isn't a believer, isn't a Christian, doesn't know Christ, or is it for Christians to make a point to us? Because then it gets a little bit more intense. Now you've got a police officer washing the feet of a suspect. I don't know exactly, like they're in an alley and it's a dark alley and it's a police officer. And so, but then you have a suburban white woman who has joined a picket line, who is protesting abortion outside of a family planning clinic. And now she is washing the feet of a young woman who is pregnant and would assume is going to the clinic for an abortion. And she's taking the time to stop and wash her feet. And then, of course, this one, the classic pastor washing the feet of a roller skater. And so just kind of move through, which I'm just telling you, roller skates are nasty. I don't know that I'd want to touch someone's feet. Anyways, and you get the idea, but here's what's interesting to me. All of the individuals who are washing feet are sort of the stereotypical, and this is why people sort of got up in arms over it, right? Are you saying I don't do that? Is this ad actually about what the church hasn't done? And is this about what the church should be doing? And in a sense, I would say the answer to that is yes. When you think about Jesus washing the disciples' feet, he's going to wash the feet of Judas, who is about to betray him for 30 pieces of silver. He's going to wash the feet of Peter, who's about to deny him, right? He's going to wash the feet of his disciples who are about to abandon him. Like Jesus intentionally and deliberately serves them, even though they're about to do harm to him, and he knows they're about to do harm to him. But the whole ad campaign is built around this idea that he gets us. Jesus understands the situations that we find ourselves in. He knows why we are where we are. And I have a couple of questions. Does he get us? And what in the world does that mean anyways? Like, what does it mean that he gets us? I actually think this is really important because this idea is actually a very biblical idea. That Jesus is not lost at all on the challenges that you and I face in life. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, it makes this point explicitly several times. I'll give you a couple of examples here. Hebrews chapter 2, 14, and then 17 through 18. Because God's children are human beings, raise your hand if you're a human being. Okay, good. The rest of you, we can talk later. God's children are human beings made of flesh and blood. The Son also became flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die. Now, this is true on two levels. God can't be killed, so Jesus becomes flesh and blood, becomes human form, but also it was a human who needed to lay down their life for humanity. Sacrificially speaking, this is true. And only by dying could he break the power of the devil, who had the power of death. Therefore, for this reason, therefore it was necessary for him to be made in, can you say every? That's a lot. To be made in every respect like us, so that he could be our merciful and faithful high priest before God. Since he himself has gone through suffering and temptation, he is able to help us when we are being tempted. Now, I've referenced this before, but this is a really critical point. It's going to sound super simple, but it's a really big deal. In order for something to be a temptation, it has to be tempting. Like if I don't actually desire it, it isn't a temptation. So, for example, if you offered me a plate of broccoli, there is no temptation there for me. As you discovered at the Good Friday service, vegetables will kill you. Pete told the story about choking on lettuce at Carl's Jr. Like, the reality is that if something isn't desirable by me, then it's not tempting to me. And the point that's being made here is Jesus is actually tempted, which requires desire for something. He is able to help us when we are being tempted. Hebrews 4:15 and 16 reiterates this. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in, here's the word again, every respect has been tempted, or parazzo, as we are, yet without sin. This word, parazzo, can actually be translated tested also. But 31 out of the 39 times it appears in the New Testament, it is translated tempted. Like, there is a desire. Here's the principle. The principle is this. Because Jesus has experienced and withstood temptation, he can sympathize with us. In other words, he gets us. He understands. Whatever the temptation is, Jesus can relate, which is really beautiful and really important. In the world that Jesus steps into, their only relationship to the gods was one of two things: the gods who were in the heavens, who were needy and needed you to perform for them, or the demigods who were on earth with you, who weren't really one of us, right? I mean, anybody seen Moana? Maui, just in case you're wondering, is not exactly like us. He wasn't made in every respect like us. There was actually still this separation between the Greek idea or the Roman idea of the demigod and what Jesus uniquely was. He was actually made in every respect like we are. He can sympathize with us. He gets us. But here's my question. What is temptation, and where does temptation come from? Which brings me to the devil made me do it, which was one of my favorite things to express whenever I was in trouble. Wasn't me. The devil made me do it. Now, sometimes the devil was my sister. Sometimes the devil was a friend of mine. But at the end of the day, it was the devil and them that made me do that thing. It wasn't my fault. I know that much. The devil made me do it. Here's the definition of temptation: the desire to do something, especially something wrong or unwise. It's interesting. People never say, like, I was tempted to get healthy, but I overcame, right? Like, I was tempted to love my neighbor, but I resisted. I was strong in that moment, and I did not love them, right? Like, temptation is almost always referencing the desire to do something wrong or unwise. Emphasis on the desire, the want to. Actually want this thing. And here's the question. If there is no right or wrong, good or evil, how can someone be tempted? If the definition of right and wrong or good and evil is really left up to you and I, it's personal preference. There isn't a sort of universal standard of right and wrong or good and evil. Then how could we say to someone they had done the wrong thing? All you have to do is take whatever your particular temptation is and put it in the category of good things. pull it out of the category of evil things. The problem is that we actually do tend to have a universal right and wrong. Imagine if we said about Hitler, man, Hitler, I know it seems like he did some terrible things, but to him, they weren't wrong. I can give you a whole bunch of examples that you would immediately, regardless of whether you believe about universal right and wrong, regardless of what you believe about objective truth or objective right and wrong, there are lots of things that you would agree with me immediately. Nope, that's evil. That's wrong. And yet we are selectively doing that all the time, just in the areas that are our personal preferences. And this issue of temptation, if there isn't actually good and evil in the world, then how can someone be tempted to do one or the other? But my other question is, where does temptation actually come from? What is the source of temptation or the genesis of temptation? It's interesting because in Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is about to launch into his public ministry. He's at the Jordan. He's about to be baptized by his cousin, John the Baptizer. And in that moment, the Holy Spirit descends like a dove. And then he's going to be led into the wilderness and be tempted for 40 days and 40 nights. Tested for 40 days and 40 nights, directly following his inauguration or his initiation into ministry. I think we should actually do that for everyone going into pastoral ministry. Man, you're in. You ready for this? Let's head out to the wilderness together. 40 days, 40 nights of testing, Jesus heads out. Here's what it says in Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by who? The devil. It's interesting because the temptation in the wilderness for Jesus is actually going to be identical to the temptation of Adam in the Garden of Eden and identical to the temptation of Satan when he was in heaven as an angelic being. It's actually the exact same temptation in each situation. James chapter 1, 13 through 15 says this, "Remember, when you are being tempted, do not say, 'God is tempting me.' God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires." Just say, "my own desires." Yep. Comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful action, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. You understand what's being said here? There's a couple of interesting things. One, it's not saying that a sinful desire is sin by itself. Things will come your way. Temptations will come your way. Desires will come your way. Those desires in and of themselves are not sin, but they lead to sinful action. Now that action could be fantasy life. That action could be all kinds of things, but they're going to lead to sinful action. And here's the thing you need to know about sinful action. Sinful action shows up pregnant. It's got roots and it wants to bear fruits. Sinful action, when it shows up in our lives, is there. And when sin is allowed to grow, it's going to give birth to a baby named death. It always does that. It's done that for all of human history. You could look back, it's done that for all of your history. You could look back at decisions and choices that you and I have made, and you could identify, nope, I allowed that thing to grow up, and it had a baby, and that baby was destruction in my life. That baby was death in my relationships. That baby was shame and guilt in my life. That baby was death to my relationship with Jesus, right? Like, we could identify that in our own lives, and it's fundamental to our understanding of temptation that the desire is trying to drag us away into sinful action, and sinful action will not be satisfied until everything good in your life is destroyed. That's the end game. That's the goal. Let's just admit it from the beginning. Romans chapter 5, verse 12 says this. When Adam, all the way back in the beginning of the story, Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, when Adam in the garden, when Adam sinned, sin entered the world. This is the same story that we're just reading in the previous passage. When sin entered the world, Adam's sin brought death. So death spread to everyone. You know why? Because everyone has sinned. You're not guilty of Adam's sin. We're guilty of our own. Like, we've made our own decisions. We've had our own desires that have led to sinful action that have produced death in our lives. Here's what's interesting. in Adam's situation? What was the temptation in the Garden of Eden? In the Garden of Eden, right, it's the perfect world. There's no sin in the world. There's no death in the world. Adam and Eve are like naked and free. Go make babies, multiply, care for the world. They're just living the dream. They get to hang out with God face to face. They get to walk with God. They have afternoon walks with God. Wouldn't that be nice? Like, he's coming over at 3. We're just going to go for a walk. I've got some questions for him. They're in the perfect world, perfect situation. And Satan, Lucifer, the serpent, shows up on the scene. Now, he's actually already had his own temptation, his own desire, and that desire has given birth to death, broken relationship in that situation. Do you know what Satan's temptation was? It says in the scriptures, he was in heaven, he was with the angelic beings, he was one of the created beings, and he looks at God and he says, I can do that job. I can be my own God. I can make my own decisions about right and wrong. I could rule my universe. I could do God. I want to be like God. He wants to usurp God's position, and that is the temptation. So when he comes into the Garden of Eden and he meets up with Adam and Eve, and they're at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the only tree in the garden God told them not to eat from. They were free to eat from any of the trees in the garden, but he only gave one. Don't you think it would be so nice if he had not put that tree in the garden? So many problems solved right there. Except that we wouldn't have relationship with God, because relationship actually requires choice. And all Adam and Eve needed was one choice in order to experience the thing God actually wanted for them, and that is relationship. But in the absence of choice, real relationship, love, affection, doesn't exist. So he gives them one choice. It's enough. It's all they need in order to be in relationship, to experience what he wants them to experience. And so Lucifer comes into the garden, and his temptation is this. Did God really say that when you eat from that tree, you're going to die? I don't think that's really what he said. Here, let me tell you what's going on with God. God's afraid. He's afraid that if you eat from that tree, you will be just like him. You'll know good and evil experientially. You'll have knowledge that only God has. In fact, that only God wanted to have. He did not want them to know it experientially. But if you eat from that tree, God's afraid of you eating from it because you'll become like him, and you can be then your own God. Make your own decisions about right and wrong. Rule your own universe. That's the same temptation that Lucifer experienced. In fact, I dare say it's the same temptation we all experience, regardless of what the issue is. Temptation, at its core, is rooted in the desire to be like God, to be the sovereign in my own life, to rule my own life, to make my own decisions about what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. It's rooted in the same desire. That's why the scriptures can say things like Jesus was tempted in all ways, like you and I. Or this passage in 1 Corinthians 10:13, the temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're different. Like, I know what their temptation is, and that isn't my temptation, but he's addressing the issue that at the core, they're actually all the same temptation: to be God, to make my own decisions about what's right and wrong, to rule my own life. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. I'll never forget when this moment was so crystal clear to me. It was actually at a movie theater years and years ago. I was attending Bible school. I was a single guy at the time. I had driven up to Anchorage to watch a movie, because if you've ever been to the movie theater in Homer, you just leave your shoes there when you're done because they're stuck to the floor. So I'd gone up to Anchorage. We were watching a movie. I won't tell you which one. It wasn't so bad. But there was like a scene in the movie. And in the scene, I was thinking to myself, I should not be in here watching this as a Bible school student in particular. And so I was like, maybe I should get up and leave. And I looked around, and there were the exit signs lit up all over the room. Like, it's required by law. And I realized if I wanted to leave, there's an exit lit up. Like, I could find it easily. I might be embarrassed. My friend might giggle at me. But the exit sign's lit up. That's what temptation in our lives is like. And when I realized that, when that dawned on me in that moment, I began to track forward. And in each and every situation that comes up in my life, I could clearly see these ways of escape God was providing me. Like, he's lighting up an exit sign. You can get out now. You can get out of this now. You can exit right here. You can tell this person. Like, it radically changed my approach to temptation in my life, and I have never once sinned since then. I'm so glad you laughed at that, because, I have been failing as a pastor. When you're tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure, which brings me to friend request. I don't know, you might be surprised by this. The title of this message in our series is Friend Request. Next week, we're dealing with love languages. We're going to be looking at characteristics of our relationship with God. And I realized I think I have a lot of friends. And so I went to Facebook because I can't remember the password to my MySpace account anymore. So if you come across it, let me know where it's like. But Facebook really became popular because you could have so many. I want you to see, I went and looked last night. I have redacted the names and faces underneath just so that, anyone who actually accidentally asked to be my friend doesn't get accused of being my friend. But I have 1,936 close, intimate friends. Like most of them, almost all of them wish me happy birthday, whether they know it or not. So anyways, now I redacted these so that, you don't know that Josh Lind is my friend, or Jonathan Garland, or Landon Chapman, or Brian Cook, or Chantel. Anyways, but here's what I realized when I went and looked last night just to see how many close, intimate, personal friends that I had, is that there's also like a friend request tab, which apparently it's been a minute since I looked at this because I'm just not great at the Facebook thing. So I went and looked. I wanted to see, and I saw 4 rows with 4 in each row, and I was like, that's not so bad. That 16 people that I had. But there was a little tab at the bottom that said see all, and that's when I discovered that I had 210 friend requests that I had not responded to, and I just want to publicly say, I'm sorry, Mom. I started to go down through the list, and I was like, oh, I actually do like this person. But then it got me thinking, how do I choose who I accept as friends and who I don't accept as friends? Because the request has been sent, right? It deserves a response, which apparently I failed at for roughly 3 to 5 years. But I went down to look through it, and I began to accept friend requests. But I realized I have a criteria. My criteria is this. We have to have at least 5 of the same friends, okay? And those friends, 4 of them cannot have dementia. I need to know in a sane moment they chose you to be their friend. So there's a whole group of people I'm like, yeah, I know that they clicked yes, but that's because they're crazy. But anyways, and so I started going down through, and I'm like, this is my criteria. Now you can look up in the right-hand corner there, and you can see where it says 20 plus. Those are notifications and messages. I just want to make a public service announcement real quick. I do not use social media as a communication platform. And also, if you don't know this, by the way, Facebook is not a conversation. It's a series of competing monologues. And if you're utilizing it in that way, go for it. But it's not a conversation. But if you want to use Messenger, it's a little more intimate. You can have one-on-one conversation with someone. I just never use it. It's too dangerous for me. And people often think I tried to get a hold of you. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. It says 20 plus because that's as high as it goes. There's probably 6,000 messages in there I don't know about. There's probably some great stuff in there. I probably won $1 million from a prince in, Nigeria. Either way, I just don't use that as a communication platform. I'm sure I have more friends now that I accepted a bunch of requests last night. It's interesting. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus is at a dinner party, and at the dinner party, there's a wealthy guy who has invited all of his wealthy friends. They have the same socioeconomic status, and he's looking around at the party, and he's like, these are my people. And he makes a comment after Jesus says a couple of things, and his comment is this: I can't wait till we're all in the kingdom of heaven, dining like this together. All the people who think like me and act like me and who are as wealthy as me, same social status as me, like we're going to get to be in heaven eating at a banquet together. And Jesus is like, this is the perfect moment to tell a story. And here's the story that Jesus tells. A man prepared a great feast and sent out many invitations, many friend requests. When the banquet was ready, he sent his servant to tell the guests, come, the banquet is ready. But they all began to make excuses. Here are their excuses. One said, I've just bought a field and must inspect it. Please excuse me. Another said, I have just bought 5 pairs of oxen and I want to try them out. Please excuse me. Another said, I now have a wife, so I can't come. The servant returned and told his master what they had said. My mom used to sing this song to me when we were younger. I don't know where it came from. I actually have not found anyone else who knows the song yet. It says, I cannot come to the banquet. Don't trouble me now. I have married a wife. I have bought me a cow. I have fields and commitments that cost a pretty sum. Pray hold me excused. I cannot come. Was that right, Mom? I think it was right, yeah. Now, I have slight dyslexia, and I would often mix up the first part of the song. I cannot come to the banquet, don't trouble me now. I have bought me a wife, I have married a cow. And that was like, not good. So don't do that. But that's the excuses that these individuals make. They're relatively silly excuses when you think about the extravagance of the banquet that they've been invited to. So here's the rest. His master was furious and said, go quickly into the streets and alleys of the town, invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. After the servant had done this, he reported, there is still room for more. So his master said, go out into the country lanes and behind the hedges and into the dark alleys and urge anyone you find to come so that the house will be full. For none of those I first invited will get even the smallest taste of my banquet. He's not saying he doesn't like the first people. He'd actually invited the first group of people. They had actually said, yes, we're going to come to the banquet. And then when the moment arrived to make some level of sacrifice to show up, they bail. And so he says, and let's invite everyone to the banquet. The reality is an invitation has been extended. A request has been submitted. This is the principle. A request requires a response, and an invitation comes with an expectation. An invitation comes with an expectation. And it's interesting because if you don't respond, if you choose not to respond to the RSVP, that actually is a response. The event will come and go, and you will not have attended the event, or the opportunity will pass and it will no longer be in front of you. But an invitation actually comes with an expectation that you would respond to it, and a request actually requires a response of some sort. Jesus in John chapter 15 says this, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You, all 1,902 of you, are my friends if. Don't you hate those pesky if passages? No. I just want to be your friend. I do not want any ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're my friends if you do what I command. Listen, I totally get you. I'm inviting you to get me, to understand me, to know me, to be in relationship with me. He goes on, he says, you didn't choose me, I chose you. This is not a predestination passage. He's literally describing to his disciples what happened in their relationship. They were like out fishing, were nowhere fast is where they were headed, like they were tax collectors. And Jesus comes to them and invites them into the relationship. Now they have to make a choice about whether or not they will enter it. You didn't choose me, I chose you, I picked you. He goes on, he says this, I chose you, I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit so that the Father will give you whatever you ask for using my name. This is my command, love each other. Or this passage, which I've taught on several times, and I've heard taught several times, and I've fixated on something different than what stood out to me for the very first time, this time as I went through it. Matthew 11:28, Jesus speaking, then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." And I've always focused on the idea that Jesus has rest for you. Are you carrying heavy burdens? Have you been living in legalism? Like, Jesus wants to set you free from all of that, and he wants to give you rest, the kind of rest that's so deep, it's in your soul, like rest in your bones. But it actually starts with an expectation. I never really noticed it before. Come to me. And if I don't come to him, he can't give me rest. If I don't go to him, he can't provide, won't provide the thing that I actually long for, the thing I actually believe is good for my soul. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Come to me, take my yoke, let me teach you. And if you'll do those things, which require humility, by the way, then you will experience rest for your souls, a light burden and joy unspeakable and full of his glory. Here's the principle. It is fundamentally true that Jesus gets you and I, and it is absolutely essential that he gets all of us. The whole idea of relationship with Jesus is surrender. Not just a one-time surrender. It's like ongoing surrender. If you know you like I know me, like I'm surrendering routinely. He's invited me into a relationship. He's made it possible. He's extended it to me. And now the question is, not does he understand me, but do I understand him? Do I want to be in relationship with him? Will I accept the request? Which brings me to pardon me. Just a few minutes ago in 1833, there was a court case that ended up making it all the way to the Supreme Court. It was a case of two individuals who had robbed the U.S. mail. Which, by the way, was a capital offense back in the day. If you robbed the U.S. mail, the death penalty was the expectation. And George Wilson, not the Dennis the Menace George Wilson, but a different one, George Wilson and James Porter had participated in a stagecoach robbery. They had robbed the U.S. mail carrier, and they had taken the mail, but they had also endangered the life of the mail carrier. And they didn't kill him, but his life was endangered. They were eventually caught. 6 counts were brought before them, and it was put before the court. They were convicted, and then they were sentenced to death by hanging. James Porter was hung to death, but George Wilson apparently had some friends, in particular a clergyman who saw humility in this young man. He had taken full ownership of what he had done. He had actually shared the whole story so that the convictions could be made. And so this clergyman went to President Andrew Jackson. That's President Andrew Jackson right there. He's 22 years old in that picture. That's what being the president will do to you. No, he's actually 77. It's about a year and a half before his death, but not that long after he had left the presidency. And that's the Supreme Court that the case ended up coming to eventually, because President Andrew Jackson gave a pardon to George Wilson, which seems like it should have been the greatest day in his life. He issued the pardon. The pardon was delivered to George Wilson, and George Wilson did something no one else had ever done in history, and as far as I know, hasn't done since. He refused the pardon, which started a case in the United States, which is still cited to this day. Can someone refuse a presidential pardon for their crimes? Made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, the Supreme Court brought their ruling down, and this was the ruling of the Supreme Court. A pardon is a deed to the validity of which delivery is essential. It may then be rejected by the person to whom it is tendered, and if it be rejected, we have discovered no power in a court to force it upon him. The answer was yes, a pardon and its terms can be rejected. Why anyone would want to reject a presidential pardon when the death sentence was on the line, who knows? But George Wilson did. And the Supreme Court ruled that a pardon is actually dependent upon the acceptance of its terms. Which is interesting because fundamentally that's what I actually believe happened at the cross. I actually believe that all sin for all time has already been pardoned. It's the declaration of Colossians chapter 2 that on the cross he covered over the handwriting of transgressions that were against us, like all the sins we had committed have been washed over by the blood of Jesus. He has disarmed the principalities and powers. He's actually already extended the pardon to you and I, which carried the penalty of our death. His pardon has already been issued and its terms. That's not the question. He fully understands you and I, and in understanding you and I, has made a way for us to enter into a relationship with God. That isn't the question. The question is, will you accept the terms of the pardon? A request requires a response, and an invitation comes with an expectation. I invite you to stand with us. My mom and dad have been inviting us over for my wife's birthday, which was several weeks ago in March, to do ice cream sundaes. I love a good ice cream sundae. And I've thought several times, why doesn't she just send the ice cream over to my house so we can have ice cream sundaes? My family's been sick. There's been like somebody's blowing snot or blowing chunks or whatever, like at my house for the past several weeks. It sounds vivid. It has been. But now we're all on the mend, and so we've been texting over this week, like, hey, you guys want to come do Sundays? And what if I just responded by saying, hey, you want to just drop the ice cream off while we're at church, and then we'll have some Sundays when we get there? And you know immediately why that's a problem, because she isn't really interested in us eating ice cream. She's interested in us eating ice cream together. It's the relationship that's actually desired. That's the thing that's actually wanted. It's not sufficient for me to say, sweet, you know I like ice cream. I'll go eat my ice cream. That would actually be rather offensive, wouldn't it? It's actually an invitation to come and experience something together. And now I have to make the decision, which, by the way, we are going over this afternoon to have ice cream sundaes. I have to make the decision if I'm going to go and enjoy the relationship that's being offered, which is the same thing being extended to you and I. It's fundamentally true, beautiful, and important to understand that Jesus gets us. He's not lost on why we're tempted by the things we're tempted by. And he's inviting you to come and discover who he is, to get him also. That's the invitation to you and I. And I realized last week in our Easter services, time was just like slipping by so fast. And I realized this piece at the end of that Easter service where I wanted to just let you know that invitation has been extended to you. I want you to know an invitation has been extended to you. Like, I never assume that when I look around a room, even if everyone had their hands lifted in worship and every eye was closed and every head bowed, like, I never assume that the people I'm looking at are what they appear to be, because I wasn't. I sat for years pretending to be something that I wasn't. And some of us, who we are, is just right out in the open for everybody to see. But the invitation is actually the same. It's an invitation to get to know Jesus, to surrender, to accept the terms of the pardon that he has extended to us. And in turn, what that should produce is love for your fellow man, fellow woman. That he got me, he understood me, he invited me. How could I reject you? How could I avoid you? How could I not extend love to you? It should produce that in us, but it actually starts with understanding what Jesus has offered. So Jesus, we come to you because you know us. You know the things, in fact, that we don't even know about ourselves. And you've extended an invitation. You've sent a request, and it requires a response. And the truth is, the time is limited, and none of us know how much time that is. But you will not refuse our response to you. Pardon has been extended, and you're wondering if we will accept the terms of it. And so we just say yes again, maybe for the first time. Maybe we've never even entertained the thought, but we can hear you inviting us today. And so Jesus, would you do the thing in us that only you can do, that the words of man, sound of music, none of that could actually accomplish? Would you bring transformation as we come in surrender to you? In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.